This is the very last recorded mini lecture of the entire semester. So sad for me, maybe sad for you, maybe happy for you, but let's finish up the humanistic perspective. The last thing that we're going to talk about is research ideas from a guy named Csikszentmihalyi and a quick critique of the perspective. Csikszentmihalyi decided to focus his research on peak experiences. We just talked about that in the second mini lecture, the idea that they are these moments in time when you realize my life is going to be different from this point forward. In Csikszentmihalyi's research, he calls them optimal experiences instead of peak experiences, but it's the same idea. He again emphasizes that we will have very few of these in our lifetime, but that they help us achieve self-actualization. And he also emphasized again that each person will have peak experiences that matter for them. So if you are a religious person, you might have your peak experience at a religious setting or in a church or a temple or a synagogue. Again, an example is maybe you feel the presence of God for the first time, or you realize what God might want for you in your life, something like that. For other people who aren't as religious, it might be a personal goal. So if you are an athlete, maybe you've wanted to have a game where you feel like every single thing I did was on point. I won the game. It was like the playoff game. I made the winning shot or throw or whatever sports thing you're doing. And the entire crowd is cheering and they like lift you up on their shoulders. That could be a peak experience for you. Maybe you are someone who's planning on going to graduate school, and again, your peak experience is your doctoral defense. People come and ask a bunch of questions, and they're kind of mean to you, and you fly through it, and you answer all of their questions, and you walk out of that door, and you are Dr. somebody now, right? So for each of us, it depends on our goals, but these moments in time are really important to us and define who we are. Csikszentmihalyi interviewed people about their peak experiences and looked for themes or patterns that he said most people, when they experience peak experiences, have these things in common. He actually said that while you're experiencing that moment, you will experience what he called flow. Other people have called it being in the zone. So you've probably heard that phrase before. Again, sports, sometimes it's used in a business setting. You are in the zone, right? Everything is perfect. You were on point. You were quick, right? Everything worked out. Csikszentmihalyi called that the experience of flow. So he said when people in his studies talk about what it was like to have a peak experience or to feel that experience of flow, he noticed 8 common components or themes. So the first is that they were doing something that was challenging but achievable. So you can't tell yourself, my goal is to get 100 points in my very first ever basketball game. That's really not an achievable goal. It's not a realistic goal. You have to set a goal for yourself that's something more realistic, like for the shots that I make, I'm going to get all of those shots, right? And regardless of how many points that is. So you have to achieve something that was a stretch for you. It had to be difficult, but it had to be something realistic. Another is that while you were having that experience, your attention was completely absorbed. So this is that experience of flow where you had no distractions. There might have been people watching you and they were, like screaming encouragement or booing you or whatever. You didn't even hear that because you were so focused. The second is that you had a clear goal or direction. So it can't just be something like, I want to do well. You have to have a specific goal. You have to know when you have achieved that goal. So there has to be an end point. The fourth is that you have to have clear feedback regarding whether you have actually achieved that yet. So it has to be something where I've completed this and I have either succeeded or failed. It can't be something abstract like I want to be better. Well, how much better do you need to be, right? You need to have something that's more specific than that in order for you to really feel like it's been a peak experience. The fifth thing is that, again, this is sort of an overlap from what he said before, but you're not thinking about anything else. So you're absolutely focused on this one single task and nothing else is on your mind. You are absolutely focused. The next one is that you feel like you were in total control. So it's like sort of you knew that you were going to be able to do this. Your confidence was there. There was never any doubt. You absolutely felt total control, total confidence. You were in power. You had power. You felt that power of your own awesomeness. The seventh one is that you kind of lose yourself in the moment. You sort of realize, for some people, they say, I realized how small I was and how huge the universe is. Other people said, I realized how important I was and that I was leaving a legacy. So it can kind of go in either direction, but it's this idea that you have this almost sort of spiritual moment of epiphany when you realize your place in the world. And then the last one is that you lose your sense of time. Some participants said it felt like time stopped and everything was really slowed down, and they could like hear every single thing going on, and they could smell things. And it was like they literally could see themselves in this kind of like stop motion type of experience. Other people have said 3 hours went by and it seemed like it was a second, right? Like I didn't even notice the time was passing. So again, it can kind of go in either direction, but it's this experience that you are outside of time. Time is no longer relevant. You are either in control of time and you can slow it down, or you were experiencing such joy that you didn't even experience the passage of time. Another thing that Csikszentmihalyi's research focuses on is, what does it really mean to achieve happiness? One of his main arguments is that material wealth does not equal happiness. So he says being really poor might equal unhappiness, right? You have experiences, you have stress, you have anxieties. Where am I going to make my next meal? How am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to be able to feed my family? So at the lower levels, there's some truth to this. But once you reach sort of a middle ground, he says you're not going to be any happier being kind of lower middle class all the way to being a millionaire. He says it doesn't matter anywhere in between that. Once you've reached that foundational idea, you're just going to be however happy you are. There can be temporary shifts in your happiness, like you get a raise, that's going to make you happy. You win the lottery, that's going to make you happy. But it only makes you happy temporarily. After a certain amount of time, you're going to go back to the level of happiness you already were. The metaphor for this is the hedonic treadmill. So hedonic is a word for kind of like how happy are you at this moment. And the treadmill is the idea that you keep striving for more and more and more, but you don't really go anywhere. So his research shows that people experience wonderful things, people experience traumas, like they get in a car accident and they're paralyzed. And he says your happiness can go up or down temporarily, but you go back to where you were before. And the interesting thing about this is, his point is, you can't live for the future, right? This is going back to what we talked about in the very first mini lecture. It's one of the basic tenets of humanistic perspective, is the idea that you're actually in control of your own happiness, right? So if you constantly think, I'll only be happy if I win the lottery, I'll only be happy if I get a raise, I'll only be happy if I get a 4.0, well, you should already be happy, right? You can't put your happiness on as a contingency plan, basically. You need to embrace who you are and what you have right now, and that you are in more control of your happiness than we often tell ourselves. We tell ourselves my happiness is based on all of these external factors, and research shows it's really not. That isn't really going to affect your base level of happiness. What affects your base level of happiness is you. You are in control of your happiness. So the last thing we'll talk about is a critique of this perspective. There are a lot of strengths, and I like a lot of things about this perspective personally. I really like the focus on positivity, the focus on growth. I especially like the focus on nonconformity and living your authentic self. Like, you be you, you let your freak flag fly, do your thing, make yourself happy, right? Like, don't let your happiness be dependent on what other people think of you, because other people are dicks. And you can't let your happiness be dependent on what other people are thinking about you. You need to be happy with who you are. Another thing I like about this perspective is that it emphasizes respect for each other. The idea that we're going to say client instead of patient. We're going to respect research participants. It's all about recognizing the individual humanity of ourselves and of each other, and being kind to ourselves and to each other. And I really dig that about the humanistic perspective. There are some legitimate criticisms of the humanistic perspective. So some people have said it's kind of a hippie perspective. It's really touchy-feely. It's kind of abstract. It's kind of vague. It's hard to do quantitative research. It's hard to put this into sort of numerical form. Is there even such a thing as perfection or self-actualization? How can we measure that? And a big problem of this perspective in therapy is that the sense of responsibility that it emphasizes might actually be somewhat self-stigmatizing to people who have mental illnesses that are biologically based. So if you're anxious or depressed because you don't have the right amount of serotonin in your brain or the right amount of dopamine or something like that, telling someone, well, you're responsible for your own happiness, just change your perspective. That's actually kind of victim blaming and stigmatizing to people who literally have an imbalance of chemicals in their brain and they need medication, right? So it's kind of blaming people a little bit for their unhappiness when there might be people who legitimately need a medication for their happiness because their serotonin is in normal levels. So I like the sense of responsibility in some ways, but I also want to make sure that we don't put responsibility on people over things that they really can't control, right? So there are good and bad things in this perspective. I encourage you to analyze it for yourself, and I hope that you enjoyed this perspective. That is our last perspective. So I will just say thank you to everybody in this class. I really enjoyed this semester. I enjoyed getting to know all of you. I hope I get to have another class with you, or if you're a senior, I hope that you touch base with me before you graduate. And good luck on the final quiz and on the final papers. Please email me or come to Zoom if you have any final thoughts. I also encourage you to fill out the student evaluation for this class. And no matter what, good luck in your future. Thanks very much.